Great. So, no, I didn't really volunteer. I opened my email a few weeks ago, and I was told that I was going to be the, what do you need? Got it. By this guy that I was going to be the keynote speaker. And I actually thought it was a joke. I sent him I just shot back a real quick email, and I was like, you are joking, right? And as evidenced by the fact that I'm in front of you today, no, he wasn't joking. But he is right. I am incredibly, incredibly nervous. It is my first solo speaking gig in about 15 years. Usually I'm hiding behind that guy over there. And so in order to help me, some of you in the audience will get this. I actually did a wardrobe change. Figured it would give me, like, I don't know. I can't even do it. No. See, I've already lost my place in my notes because of that. Okay. So I hate microphones. Just bottom line is I absolutely hate them. I could probably do this talk if you'd all like scoot really close and I just stood in front of you like it was back in school. But when I realized that Josh wasn't joking, I really, really struggled with whether or not I should accept the offer. I knew that he had considered me because of a mini rant that I had subjected him and Janice to a couple months ago, and because of that, I didn't know what the hell I was going to talk about when I got up here. It was really tough. The stuff I had talked to them about was kind of crusting over some lines, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So I made a list, because lists are good. And the first column of this list was things I like to talk about. And this was pretty easy, right, because they end up being comfortable things. I like to talk about my kids. I like to talk about good books. And I like to talk about food specifically. I like to talk about chocolate. It's like my favorite thing in the world. And occasionally, I can talk about myself, right? So when it came to making part 2 of that list, which is things that I don't like to talk about, that got a little bit harder. In general, the topics were easy enough to come up with, but, again, it's things you don't like to talk about, and they're largely uncomfortable things. So I surprised myself because the very first thing I put down was me. As much as I like to talk about things I've done, experiences I've had, and tell you funny stories about my kids, I'm very, very rarely really talk about who I am and what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing. So real quick, let's just get that one out of the way. I'm a mom. I've got 3 boys. They're ages 17, 13, and 5. I'm checking. And that means I will have one going into college next year, one entering high school, and one entering kindergarten. So that's a whole lot of crazy in our lives. I am, as Josh said, the lead organizer, or I don't even know if you said it, but I am the lead organizer of ShmooCon. Yeah, you did. Okay, whatever. ShmooCon's this little conference in D.C. We've held it every year for 12 years now. It's a lot of fun. I have no flippin' idea, Josh. I think it's our 12th year. Okay. Which makes it our 11th anniversary, or 13th, I don't even know. I know, I did math wrong. So those 2 areas of my life, running ShmooCon and being a mom, are really the only 2 areas of my life that I consider myself an expert in. And it's not because I'm really good at either of them. It's just that I've put in thousands and thousands of hours doing exactly those 2 things. The last thing I'm going to tell you right now is, and I've already missed my slide. These stupid red lines aren't working. The last thing I'm going to tell you is that I consider myself geek by proxy and not by practice. I long ago gave up any kind of technical training, technical path, and have only been surrounded by it almost every day of my life for the last 20 years, in part due to being married to Bruce. But who? Yeah. Let's go with who. All right. My desk is not large enough. So I literally just lost my page. I'm sorry. So on paper, that list I just gave you, that I'm a mom, that I'm the lead organizer of ShmooCon, and that I have absolutely no technical expertise, doesn't really look like I have a lot to offer you on paper. And that's exactly what I felt when they asked me to give this talk. I didn't really know why they were asking me, like, why me, and why does anything I have to say, why would that be important? And Bruce kind of laughed at me. I'm going to talk about him a lot because 20 years. But he kind of laughed at me and pointed out that I was having a pretty good episode of something that's called imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome is not as commonly thought the fear that people are going to figure out you're not as smart as you're pretending to be. It's kind of a byproduct, if you will. It's a bit of a fuzzy line. But more accurately, it's the inability to recognize one's own expertise, one's own accomplishments, one's own abilities. And I guess, in other words, it's just a bunch of self-doubt, right? So it's something we've all felt at one point, probably multiple points in our lives. And the greatest example that I have of this is that it took me years to say out loud that I run ShmooCon. I would dance around that subject like it was nobody's business. I would say things like, well, I help run the con, or I do most of the logistics. And the fact of the matter is, I own the business, I do all the finances, I make all the major decisions, and it doesn't matter that I pull in a bunch of opinions or talk to a bunch of people to make those decisions. When it comes down to it, I'm reliable. I am reliable, but I'm responsible, more to the point, for all and anything related to the con. God, I hope I'm reliable. I'm here, aren't I? So and I should take just a second, because as Josh was saying this morning, it's not that ShmooCon's a one-person show. It isn't at all. It takes an army of people to put on an event like this, and certainly to put on ShmooCon. And I wouldn't want to and can't do it without those folks, but it's in part due to those people that today I can easily say that I run ShmooCon. But here's another recent example of imposter syndrome. When I first started to tell people that I was going to give this talk, some folks were really cool. They were like, you're going to do great. I know you're really nervous. This is going to be awesome. Just go get them, Heidi. And those people, they're now my best friends if they weren't already, but they're totally my best friends. But other folks were maybe a little more hesitant. They're like, well, that's cool. Or it was kind of like this, read between the lines sort of impression that I was getting that, well, why would they pick you? And the reality of the situation is they may or may not have meant that, right? But my own insecurities were coming into play. And again, I was stuck in a position where I didn't know what I had to offer any of you. So real quick, because I feel like I owe you just a little bit more, I have a pretty geeky past. My first computer was a Timex Sinclair. I remember setting it up at one of my birthday parties and all these kids coming over and they had no idea what it was. I wrote my first program on that computer. Yes, it was Hello World. My father was the technology coordinator for a school district, and I remember going with him to teacher-in services and teaching my teachers literally how to turn on the Apple computer, that's singular, that we would bring us from school to show teachers what was coming in near years. Now, about 10 years later, my dad was installing the IBM lab at the high school or something, so it went pretty fast during that time period, right? I was on the internet really early in, I can't remember now, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I had an account at the university, the local university, and I was writing back to BMS command pages for the university, and I pretty much never left the internet after that. I went to school in Alaska, met Bruce up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. I studied math. Like him, I did not get my degree. And we both went to work at Alaska's largest ISP. So I worked at Internet Alaska, I worked front desk, customer service, I worked in marketing, and when I left, I was actually the lead of the customer care department. So then we moved to Virginia. I quit working, and I took this huge, long break from anything related to tech, except for the fact that during this time, the Shmoo group had been created, and that was still kind of bubbling around, and they were having their heyday going to DEF CON. I should go back a second and say that I beat all of them. I went to DEF CON 5 while I was pregnant with my first child, not an experience I would recommend. But I was just kind of on the edges of that. The Shmoo group was kind of this thing. They had this name for themselves, and I was sitting at home with my kids reading all the emails as they went by. When we moved to Maryland, that's when the idea of ShmooCon came about, and I kind of just went, okay, yeah, I'm in. So for the first 3 years, I wasn't in charge, but I was at the top level, and I eventually took over running the conference, and the rest is pretty recent history. So I've told you all of that, and it's pretty much my resume for why I'm here today. I should also tell you that I've never once in my life considered myself a hacker, but it should be telling that one of my high school and elementary school and middle school nicknames was Brain. Yeah, that's a good one. So I can look at all those things I just told you, and I can force myself to rationally understand that it provides me sort of knowledge and the basis for the rest of what I'm going to tell you today. But I still have a hard time accepting it, right? I still feel like I'm sort of on the edge of what all of you guys are doing, despite the fact that I've been here for so long, and longer than most of you in this room. So it's imposter syndrome, right? I struggle with it all the time. And here's the things that I do to help me with that. First of all, and I'm going to totally sound like a mom when I say these things, but that's because I am. Remember that you're not perfect. Everyone fails at one point, multiple points all the time in their lives. It's important to recognize what you don't know. It is also important to embrace the knowledge that you do have and work to increase that knowledge. And frankly, calling out what you're feeling, just calling it what it is, saying, I'm feeling like I don't know anything, or this is imposter syndrome, whatever, that really helps too. So I pretty much just went through that exercise in front of you, and I'm still nervous as hell, right? So, it works and it doesn't work. But we see a lot of this in the InfoSec industry. And it actually kind of leads into my next topic, because shouldn't surprise you that the phrase imposter syndrome, or actually they used the phrase imposter, I think, phenomena, was coined in a study in 1978 about women, accomplished women. They studied about 150 women, and all of them felt this way to one extent or another. So I'm zooming past my slide marks here. Gender is a huge topic. There's a lot here that I don't want to talk about, and I don't even really feel qualified to talk about, except that as a woman, I have some pretty strong feelings about a few things, but they probably aren't what you think they are. And first of all, you hear all the time how we need more women in STEM. And in particular, I can't tell you how often I see statements like, we need women in STEM fields to break the stereotype. That's like, thanks, Captain Obvious, you're helpful. So here's my shtick. Need is a really funny word. There's not many things in life we truly need. If you go back to that list, the very first list I shared with you about things I like to talk about, food is something I need, right? But of course we want more women in STEM. As a group, of course, women offer a really unique perspective, and diversity of any kind is usually a good thing. And there are large numbers of studies being done, or that have been done and are being done, that tell us why we have this deficit of women in this field. And we know that many of those reasons are institutional, they're generational, they're cultural, and that we need to address those in order to get more women in this field. But going back to the original statement, we need more women in STEM. So all the stats that I looked at were on the technological side of STEM. If you don't get a degree in STEM or aren't fulfilling a technical role, you're not in STEM. And I think that by fighting so hard to point out all these important roles, you're really kind of overlooking the contributions that are already there. Folks like recruiters, sales, marketing, graphic artists, and even us lowly conference organizers. And as a demonstration of this, we've had an enormous, we've had like 6, but that's a lot, of submissions to the ShmooCon CFP from people in like recruiting and marketing and other sort of support departments talking about industry trends and good business practices. And maybe they fit our program, maybe they don't, but is that information useful? Absolutely, that information is useful. And I get it. I get that if you graduate with a degree in marketing, you're not going to show up as a tick mark in a survey about STEM graduates. But by the time you're entrenched in a STEM-based company, hopefully working for a greater good, surely that should count as a tick mark in some survey about STEM careers. And that's sort of my point. And in the end, this really transcends gender. I put these silly slides up here playing on the word support women, but really take out the word women and put in people, right? My entire career, which is not really a career, but my entire working life has been in small business. Started out in Internet Alaska. My involvement in Fort Knox, that's N-O-C-S, not the other one. Bruce's company, Ponatech, and of course, ShmooCon. And I can tell you that in those environments, many people wear many, many different hats. And it's just really important not to overlook contributions that are technical and not technical. So inclusiveness is a really, really big thing. So one way in this community that we try to promote inclusiveness is through codes of conduct. Okay, this shouldn't be unfamiliar. Codes of conduct are a pretty common thing. They exist at schools and workplaces, and over the last number of years, the growing thing has been that they are being put in place at conferences and large gatherings. Okay, so to clarify, this isn't a new idea. It's been around for a long time, but it's been at the forefront of a lot of discussions around InfoSec and conferences like this. And mostly that's because of issues, sadly, involving women. But the policies are there. They're really there to protect everyone, not just a specific gender or a specific lifestyle. Basically, codes of conduct are an anti-harassment statement encompassing encourage and discourage behavior, and they should have a good reporting mechanism outlined, who to contact, who to call, what you can do. They serve a purpose, it's true, and I'm not at all saying that they're bad, but it probably isn't a surprise that I'm not really behind the movement as a whole. What I'm frustrated with is the cookie cutter, cut, paste attitude that a lot of conferences have had just in reaction to this. It was pretty easy, when this call to action came to play, to just go to ADA Initiative site, and they're now defunct, but go to their website, go to the Code of Conduct section, kind of look them over, pick one that fit you, change a few words, and be done. So I'm also frustrated with the fact that some of these policies that get developed are so overzealous, and the attitudes that accompany them actually start to infringe on the rights of free and public speech. And I get that a conference isn't really, a public space. It's not the quad on campus where everybody can go protest. But there's a need to also protect the rights of the speaker, right? So a big part of the rationale behind putting these codes of conduct into place was that there's this claim that simply having the policy will prevent harassment. And I'm just going to sit here and tell you that I'm not sure we have a whole lot of proof of that. But I will concede and absolutely agree that having a policy in place really does help those who are looking to know that they have support from the organization. That's an absolute truth. And codes of conduct really do put a lot of responsibility on the con organizer or the organization behind the conference. And I'm not at all shirking that responsibility. I work very hard at ShmooCon to make sure that our staff is trained. We're doing more and more each year. We're also working to actually train our attendee to work with us to make sure that we are providing an atmosphere that's welcoming and open to everybody. But I claim it's more than a two-way street. It takes all of us. It's sort of that thing called like a roundabout for my traffic analogy here. It takes all of us working together to create an environment, again, that isn't marginalizing or overtly hostile while maintaining open disclosure. Because uncomfortable conversations do need to happen. And again, I claim that we all need to work together to change our culture and expectations, as a community. So let's talk about the community. We see this word thrown around a lot on Twitter and Facebook. This is our community, our hacker community, our InfoSec community. And you see this sort of stretch between industry, community, and then sometimes you see the word family. I don't like the word family. Here's how I choose to look at it. A family is part of a community, and the community is a function of this industry, right? So by definition, avoiding anything that mentions bloodlines, a family is a group of people united by certain convictions. A community is a body of persons of common and especially professional interests scattered throughout a larger society. And an industry is a group of businesses that provide a particular product or service. So industry is driven by money. It's driven by capitalism, and it's going to make decisions that are in the best interest of that industry, right? Family is a more closed group, right? It's a closed group that where of like-minded people where often blood is thicker than water. At least that's what it's supposed to be. And neither of those models, in my opinion, represents what needs to happen in order to make InfoSec a better place. Community, on the other hand, I think bridges that gap. It allows us to be free and individual thinkers and innovators. with the ability to learn and share information without needing to fit in some kind of abstract way. And this isn't to disparage those who use that word, right? I've got lots of friends who use the word family, and I'm not purposely calling any one person or group out because this isn't a personal thing. I'm fully aware that this is a semantic argument, and I'm tending towards being pedantic, and I'm just going to admit that right now. And we all have our chosen family. There are people in this room that are part of my chosen family. There are people in this room I have to call family. Maybe that was by choice, too, though. I just think that for many of us, the word family has a stronger meaning. And in an industry where folks are often already socially challenged and disadvantaged, it's pretty easy to feel like you're not a part of this elusive family. We should absolutely continue to focus on building a community where inclusiveness matters and where, again, ideas and free exchange of information is encouraged. And the bottom line, again, is use whatever word you want, right? Just be aware that your word choices may or may not have the same meaning to the people who are hearing them, and therefore they may have the opposite effect that you're intending. So, this is not a Star Trek reference, but those of you who know me well knew I'd get one in here somehow. But I thought while we were talking about family, we would certainly talk about the next generation. This one's going to be pretty short. Especially here, I think that we all celebrate the next generation, right? We're at a university. There's lots of kids in the room. There's students here, and I think that's fantastic. So this is going to be a little bit preaching to the choir. But more often than not, I run across comments that say they call out the noobs, or they call out the tourists, or they call out the wannabes. And this is followed by this idea that these people have nothing to contribute because they haven't walked the line. They haven't learned things the hard way. And, of course they haven't. The hard problems that our students today are facing are not the problems we faced 10 years ago. They're not the problems we faced 20 or 30 years ago. They're learning differently in part because of all the work that we have done to put these programs in place, to put on conferences like this, to set up the better curriculum in the schools so that they can be smarter and have better access to the education that they need to be successful in this industry. And there's no reason for this to be like a fraternity or sorority where you have to go through the same initiation to be part of this club. And it's a little silly maybe even to say this out loud. I'll just back up a second. But a big part of life is paving the path for what comes behind us, right? So motivation changes as we get older. I see it all the time. I experience it myself. Life happens, kids happen, health happens, whatever. So that next generation is really important. So if you're guilty of any of those comments that I said earlier, calling out the noobs, calling them wannabes, I'm going to tell you just to stop and instead try and adapt this attitude that I just saw on Twitter, and I'm going to it's Adam Eli, and he said, "I often follow InfoSec noobs. Their curiosity will often teach us something new." All right, big jump to personal security. I have long subscribed to the Bruce Potter theory of privacy is dead. So I asked him to define this in 2 bullet points, and he said, in order to meaningfully participate in today's society, you have to give up what we conventionally think of as privacy, and that this trend will only continue as we get more connected. So, yeah, privacy is dead. And that being said, the Potters are pretty private people. All right, but what about Facebook, Heidi? Because I'm on Facebook all the time, and it's a great way to procrastinate just about everything in your life, including writing this talk. But here's my pretty much singular point about this topic. There's a difference between accepting known risk versus jumping into something without knowing the risk at all, right? I had a Facebook account for years and didn't use it at all. And it wasn't until we went on the epic cross-country bike journey with JP there in the back that I started checking into Facebook a lot, because I found that it was a really, really easy way for me to get information about what was happening back home, and it was also a really easy way for me to push information out about our trip. So yeah, I'm on Facebook every day. And yes, I use my real birthday, and if you remember that list at the top, I really like chocolate. But for the Potters, it's all about balance, right? So we try to be active in managing whatever information we have out there that's either private or public, while accepting whatever risk it is that we need to in order to accomplish our goals. And, again, sometimes that goal is as silly as telling you the words of wisdom that my 5-year-old has uttered at 3 o'clock in the morning. But it's what gets me through my day. So, now that I've talked about all the things that I didn't really want to talk about, I realize that almost everything I've said today has had some kind of caveat. I've said things like, well, I don't want to offend you, or I'm not saying that this is bad. And that might come across as defensive or trying to soften the blow, and it's not. It's just a reminder that everyone has opinions to offer and that listening to all sides is a key component to progress, right? So for much of what I've talked about, it's not even that I'm right or that I'm wrong. It's that I've tried to start a discussion, and my hope is that everything I've said here today promotes further discussion. If you're going to be a part of this community, these things are going to come into play. Okay, I'm going to leave you with one last silly little momism. Okay, life isn't about being the best, it's about being your best, and being your best includes being open to ideas and suggestions and always, always learning. That's it. You can click that, please.